Hello again, everyone. It's Professor Seraphina here, and I thought, just in case no one knows what philosophy is in the first place, it's always good to have a little background in philosophy to know what it is you're getting into and what we'll be up to in learning about philosophy. And you're just in an ethics class. I don't know if you've had an introduction to philosophy or not before, and um, you know, you might want a little bit of a background. So, just briefly, because our main focus is, of course, on ethics, and that's what we have to work with over the course of our time. But what we know of as Western philosophy, at least, is approximately 2,500 years ago. It was originated in ancient Greece, and these people at the time were coming into contact with many other different cultures, different peoples, different ways of thinking, different foods, of course, different philosophies, different religions. So basically, a whole kind of melting pot, and like what we might call the first globalization, if you will. And these guys, they had a lot of free time on their hands, and they started thinking outside the box, and um, because with all these different perspectives on everything, who's to say that I have the right one or they have the right one? So they started asking a whole bunch of questions depending on rational thought and logic, as we'll see, and sort of an inquisitiveness that's backed up by a type of scientific thinking, but of course predates what we now know as the scientific method. So at any rate, what we know of Western philosophy comes in different branches. There are five main branches, which are logic, metaphysics, epistemology, aesthetics, and ethics, of course. Now, these refer to different things, and a lot of times they have some overlap. So, metaphysics might be called the ground type of philosophy, what we found everything on, the foundation, the groundwork, because it studies what is reality or existence, what is real existence, what is it made of, what does it do, if anything, what kind of part are we in it all, what role do we play, where do we come from? These are different kinds of questions. Primarily, you might run into a lot of metaphysics in general and in more common times, dealing with ontology, a specific part of metaphysics, which deals with being or existence itself. And a lot of times you might hear me or see the word ontology or ontological. And when you use that, what at least my understanding of it is the pure reality in and of itself of the world, if we can actually have such a view because of our own subjectivities and concepts. So one that's kind of pure away from concepts, just seeing things just as they are, no judgments, no preconceptions or anything like that on them. So anyway, metaphysics is the deep kind of thinking, and it's my favorite, but we're going to deal with ethics, of course. So epistemology is a nice fancy word for the study of knowledge. It asks questions about what is knowledge, how do we attain knowledge, where does it come from, how do we learn stuff, and then it goes on to ask other questions, little deeper questions like, how do we know something, or when we think we know something? Then even deeper than that, how do we know that we know, or know that we know that we know? And it can get confusing there, so you don't have to go that deep with it, of course. Those are for the dedicated individuals. But questions about that, and we'll see two different views of epistemology, the empiricist and the rationalist, in our studies going forward. So you'll learn a whole lot more about that as we go ahead. And aesthetics is the study of art, beauty, love, and things like that. So a little bit of an abstract branch of philosophy. It's also one of my favorites because it deals with those passionate things. What is love? What is beauty? I admit that I love beauty, um, but what are these things in real life? We talk about these things, and they might move us when we see something beautiful, or fall in love, or feel some kind of love in watching a movie or anything else. Like, what is this? What are these feelings? Why do we have them? And can we even relate the actual experience with anyone else? Can we really know what the other person is actually feeling? That's a little deeper on that end too. So moving on, there's of course logic, and logic is related to math in some ways and also to science. There's a big overlap between this. But logic is just a formulaic discipline, if you will, of rational and clear thinking, and how to create and analyze and evaluate different types of arguments and argument structures in the more formal and symbolic sense. And you will look a little bit at some of this stuff too in regard to how you recognize arguments, in specific how you recognize ethical and moral arguments, how to tell whether they're actually worth listening to, if they make any sense, if they're valid or sound, or if they're cogent or not cogent, or if they're just ridiculous, or maybe some truth or fact to it. Different kinds of things like this, and how statements are structured, and how an argument is formulated, and certain structures, whatever you put in there with the symbols, it creates a valid argument in and of itself, the way that that's structured. But that's a lot of the symbolic stuff, and you can get into that later, of course. And so ethics is our baby, if you will, and ethics really studies the good life, like the pursuit of excellence and how we ought to live. And it's where this how we ought to live, this ought part, that where we think of morality comes in. How should we be? How should we act towards one another? How should we act in certain situations? What is right and wrong? And how should we behave with each other? And then ethics asks these kinds of questions and others related to these things, these topics. And there are several different ethical theories or ethical approaches, and certainly different moral theories, which you'll be learning about. And some of these are consequentialist and deontological. There's also virtue ethics. And these are all interesting and fascinating, and the way they're argued as well. But just want to give you the overview for now. So there's also social political philosophy, which kind of descended from ethics, or came out of ethics. And of course it's like ethics on a more broader level. Of course, the social, the global, the bigger picture. Not how we just interact with ourselves, family and friends, and the community at home, but the bigger world outside of ourselves and our communities. So that's kind of an extension of ethics, and becomes its own thing. And then political science became its own academic discipline in and of itself. So everything kind of branches out from philosophy in one way or another. Some other types of philosophy or areas are things such as philosophy of mind, studying what the mind is, what consciousness is. It kind of overlaps with epistemology and how we know things. And it relates also to subjectivity and language. There's philosophy of language. There's philosophy of medicine, philosophy of law, philosophy of religion. The list goes on and on and on. And so these are some of the areas you'll be learning about, some of the things you'll be discussing and working with as we go forward. There are a lot of different theories in philosophy over the course of the centuries, and a lot of different thinkers and arguments between each other back and forth, but a lot of it is more of a progression, if you will. We progress over time, learning more and more through science and other disciplines, and the more we know, the more we know about how to do things better and in a healthier way, and everything else that's better and good. So that's just a brief overview of where we're going with all this, specifically ethics, and let's just dive right into some more materials and see what happens from there.